Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Menopause Collective with me, Sarah Utley, your host. The focus of the podcast today is menopause in the workplace, and I'm delighted to be joined by a menopause in the workplace expert and trainer, Bev Thorogood. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Sarah. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
You're very welcome. So Bev is the founder of Floresco Training, and she provides menopause awareness training in the workplace to help retain female talent and improve productivity. Bev's also a certified nutritionist, personal trainer, and NLP practitioner, and she coaches women on their personal and professional development. I'm going to dive straight in to your own menopause experience in the workplace. You've had a 30-year career in the MOD. And when you reached 50 years of age in 2016, you said your life and work experience changed. Can you tell our viewers and our listeners what this looked like and felt like for you?
Yeah, of course. So yes, so I actually spent 32 years working for the Ministry of Defence, and 30 of those were working for the Air Force. It's quite a male-dominated organisation. But if I'm honest, I never particularly felt like as a woman it was a disadvantage or anything like that. It was a great place to work. And I wasn't the high flyer particularly, but I always felt I was quite competent and conscientious, and I felt like I was doing a good job. But I kind of got to a management position. I was in learning and development and had a couple of roles that were sort of learning and development focused. And just before my 50th birthday, so in November 2015, I'd moved jobs into a brand new role, which was as a training assurance manager on an aircraft repair squadron, and like an aircraft repair training school. So basically teaching the guys how to fix aircraft. I have to add here, I wasn't teaching them how to fix aircraft, but I was looking after the assurance of the training. And in reality, it was a bad fit for my skill set. It was all about governance and policy and standards and quality, which wasn't really my thing. I like to be in front of people and the training delivery. So I'd kind of moved into a role that was not a great fit anyway. And I was trying to learn all of this stuff. And I turned 50 in the January of 2016. So I'd literally been in the job about 6 weeks when I had my 50th birthday. And I was blessed with my very first hot flush on my 50th birthday, which was a nice little gift from somebody up there. And I thought, okay, I've been in denial for a few years now about this. I didn't have my mum to talk to about menopause. So I've been in denial about this, but I'm 50. This is probably it. And I honestly thought that it was hot flushes. I had no idea there was a whole host of other symptoms associated with it. And as time went on in this new job, I felt like I was completely failing to pick up the basics. Now, I'd had lots of jobs. When you work in the civil service, there's a tendency to move from role to role. So you're a bit of a jack of all trades. Some of us are anyway. And I'd had lots of different types of jobs. So I'd had to learn lots of new skills along the way. But this time I felt like I just wasn't taking the new information in. It was like everything was an uphill struggle. So I think I now know, looking back, that it was a combination of brain fog. It was a combination of the hormonal changes that were happening that were leading to concentration issues, focus issues, memory issues, which ultimately led to massive confidence issues. Other things that were going on for me, I was having these sort of irrational outbursts of crying, which isn't great when you work in an organ, in a department which are the majority male. Now, I had a fabulous boss. He was a man. He was quite a young man. He was only 27 or so. But the number of times that I ended up sort of crying in his office, talking about how I was failing, what a mistake he'd made in hiring me, and I couldn't grasp the basics, and I was stupid, and just crying. And of course, he was saying to me, "Look, I'm not sure what you think you're seeing here, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing somebody doing a good job. Don't worry about it. Of course, it's new, but you're fine. But I wasn't. I felt like I was completely losing the plot. And the brain fog was so bad at times. I genuinely, and I've heard this so many times from other women now, felt like I had early onset dementia. I was forgetting really crucial bits of information. I was forgetting to do jobs. I was forgetting that I'd done jobs and nearly spending lots of money again doing the same job that I'd forgotten I'd already done. And this went on for 2 years. And he was really supportive, but he was clueless about menopause, and that's not his failing. He didn't know, he hadn't had any education, but guess what? Neither had I. And I was a 50-year-old woman and I had nothing. So long story short, after 2 years, I was really, really struggling. I don't know if outwardly, apart from my boss, anybody else would have really noticed. I think I was masking it quite well, but it was exhausting wearing that mask all of the time. And I eventually asked for a period of 12 months unpaid leave. Like many women at that kind of age in life, I had lots of other domestic stuff going on, caring responsibilities, changes in my domestic life. My husband was leaving the Air Force. I'd just become a grandma. My daughter was a single mum. There was, just loads of stuff going on. And I just felt like I was completely losing my grip on things. So I asked the MOD, or I asked my boss if he'd support an application for 12 months unpaid leave because I didn't want to go off sick. And this was something the MOD had quite often approved, but they had a financial moratorium on recruitment at that point, and they rejected it, which was a bit of a shock to the system because I had an exemplary record of 32 years of service for the MOD. So I suppose I felt a little bit let down that the first time I'd ever asked for some help, it was rejected. And I ended up resigning in March 2018. And you mentioned that, I'm a certified nutritionist and personal trainer. I actually did those qualifications in the 2 years while I was working because I felt like I was struggling so much at work, but I needed something to do for myself. I'd also gone down the route of losing a lot of weight and trying to get really fit because I was feeling fat and frumpy, and it all kind of came together. So I was doing a little bit of coaching on the side as well. And all of the women that I was coaching around weight loss and kind of like it was stress management, well, lo and behold, they were menopausal women. And I was hearing lots of the similar stories to my experience. I'm a bit of a nerd, I guess, when it comes to anything sciencey. I like to have all of the evidence and the information. I'm not very good at just listening to other people's opinions. I like to go and find out what's actually happening. So in that time, I'd also done quite a lot of research around what menopause was for my own benefit, but also because I thought, blimey, this is a lot more than hot flushes. There must be more to this. Why am I feeling like this? I guess I was searching for explanations. So a couple of months after I'd left the Air Force, I left working for the Air Force. I was a civilian, I wasn't in the Air Force. I actually got contacted by the Air Force's head office at Air Command, who are based down at High Wycombe. And an ex-colleague of mine had been chatting to the HR manager there, and she'd been saying they were looking for somebody to deliver some menopause awareness workshops. And my ex-colleague had said, you need to speak to Bev. She's got a learning and development training background, and she knows her stuff around menopause. So that's how I ended up doing what I do now, which is sort of going into businesses and raising awareness through training. So I ran those 2 workshops in October, actually on World Menopause Day 2018. And that sort of fired up the interest, I guess, but also the fact that I realized that if the Air Force were looking at raising awareness of menopause, and it had nothing to do with me leaving, by the way, they aren't connected. It was just kind of coincidental. But I thought if the Air Force are looking at this as a workplace issue, maybe there is more to this. Maybe other organisations need to know about this. And of course, I was out of a job. So looking for some way to earn money as well. I thought, well, let's take my training skills and the knowledge that I've now got about menopause and my own lived experience and bring that together as a business. And that's what I do now. And that's what I've been doing for 4 years now. And since then, of course, I've worked with, probably in reality, you know, I've spoken with hundreds of businesses and thousands of employees to try and raise the subject of menopause and the profile of menopause and stop it being that stigma that it's still, unfortunately, although it's definitely getting better, in some organisations it still is a not talked about subject. So I wouldn't say I was passionate then about it, but I've certainly grown. That passion has grown over the last 4 years. And there's been amazing work done in so many areas, as you know, Sarah. It's now so much more a mainstream conversation than it was 4 years ago when I started. So we're on this wonderful kind of journey of raising the profile of menopause and stopping it being a taboo. And I'm really happy to be part of that journey.
And eventually, when menopause is mainstream, when we all have conversations naturally, we'll all be out of work.
Well, there
is
is
a good sign.
Yes. Well, that's my exit plan. That's my exit plan. In 5 years' time, they won't need people like me because it will just be something that happens and we're all aware of it and nobody's discriminated because of it. And yes, I'll be out of the job, but I won't care because I'll be 61 by then. So.
Fabulous. And you mentioned then you've spoken with and you continue to speak with lots of organisations, hundreds of women. I'm curious to know, what do you hear most from women about their experience of menopause in the workplace?
I think the thing that comes up more than anything is the ignorance, in the truest form of the word, the ignorance that still exists around menopause. Ignorance of the women themselves. We're not educated. We don't know what's to be expected. But I think the big shock for most women, certainly within the workplace, is how much sooner it starts than they think. So we have this stereotypical image of menopausal women kind of looking like I do, so mid-50s, grey hair, excuse me, and actually the majority of women start to feel the impact of perimenopausal changes, perimenopause being the lead up to menopause, which is when our periods stop, which incidentally, Sarah, I hadn't even heard that word 6 years ago when this started. But that perimenopausal phase, when our hormones start to become a bit more erratic and disrupted, often starts for women in their late 30s, way before most of us are thinking menopause. So all of these sort of often psychological and cognitive symptoms are insidiously creeping up on us, and we don't recognize them as menopause. So I think the messages I get back when I talk to women is, I had no idea it started this soon. And I had no idea that so many of the symptoms I'm experiencing are menopause related. So it's this sort of almost like a veil of ignorance that we all have around the subject. And it's the medical profession as well. It's not just women in the workplace. It's like nobody's really looked at the bigger picture around menopause. We've just got this idea that it's hot flushes when you're in your 50s, you get a bit snappy and you can't sleep very well. Oh, and you probably get a bit of a muffin top. And it's so much more than that. So I think it's that lack of understanding, lack of education that comes through more strongly than anything. But of course, knowledge is power, because once you know what it is, then that puts you back in control and you can do something, which is what I also find when I'm delivering training. I see an awful lot of penny drop moments from the women in the training that I deliver, and they're like, oh my God, I just, joined those dots up. Now I feel like I understand what's going on. I can do something about it.
Yeah. And I completely resonate with that. As we've discussed before, I was in my early 30s when I started experiencing perimenopause, which is atypical, but it was the psychological impact and symptoms that really affected me in my early 30s. And it took me a long time to join the dots, and knowledge is power. But even when I spoke to my mum, she didn't really have a bad experience of menopause. She had some hot flushes and therefore couldn't relate at all to how I was showing up, the anxiety that I was feeling, the confusion, the feeling dislocated from my body and my own life. She just couldn't understand. So I didn't have the comfort of being able to learn from my mum's experience. Although, as we know, every woman's experience of menopause is so unique. So it's very hard to compare.
But also, you know, I look back at my mum. I lost my mum when I was in my early 20s, so we never ever discussed menopause. But when I look back to her life, she didn't work full time. She worked a few part-time jobs. She did, there wasn't, I don't think there were the pressures on her. She had different pressures, but I don't think there were the same pressures that we have as women now. Also, I'm not convinced that when we talk to our mums and they talk about their menopause, they realize that probably some of the things they were going through, they were experiencing them, but they didn't recognize them as menopause because they maybe didn't have hot flushes. I know I've spoken to my mum-in-law on a number of occasions. She's 90 now. And when we first started talking about menopause, she said, oh, I didn't really have anything like that. I don't really remember it. I don't remember having any problems. I had a few hot flushes, but she was on HRT because she'd had a hysterectomy. So on the surface, it didn't sound like she'd had a bad experience. But then the more we spoke, the more we started to dig in and peel back some of the layers. Yeah, she was anxious, and yes, she was feeling a bit depressed, and she was exhausted, and she had insomnia, and she wasn't sleeping, and she used to get migraines, but she hadn't connected them all as being menopause related. So I think a lot of times when we speak to family members, they don't really give us a true picture of their experience because they haven't joined the dots themselves.
No, I agree completely with you. So going back to thinking about the workplace, 3/4 of businesses don't have a menopause policy. What can leaders do to support their organisations to become more menopause inclusive?
I think first of all, they've got to acknowledge that it's a thing, that this is real, and it's not, it's not a tick box exercise. It's not just another tick in the D&I or ED&I box. This is affecting thousands and thousands of women. I think 13 million women, I believe, if I got my facts right, in the UK are currently experiencing menopause. About 900,000 women left the workplace last year because of menopause. So I think, first of all, there's got to be this recognition that this is a real problem. And it's a real problem for businesses because economically, that's a huge amount of money. I heard somebody talking on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, was saying it costs on average around about 213% of somebody's annual salary to replace them.
Wow.
That's big. If you've got women in your employ, especially if they're in senior leadership roles where, they're bringing huge amounts of diversity and skill and talent. We know that diversity in organizations increases profitability. We know that. But if we're losing those talented women from the workplace, not only are we losing all of the intellectual capital, the skills, the knowledge, the experience, the talent that they bring, but it's also costing dearly in terms of, just the bottom line to lose those women and then have to replace them, and the loss of productivity in that time. So I think, to answer your question, first of all, you've kind of got to know you're in prison before you can break out. So they've got to acknowledge that there's a problem here. Yep. And then I think it comes down to senior leadership setting the tone, that actually we recognise that menopause is a subject we need to be talking about, that we need to be supporting, and putting some sort of awareness campaigns in place. Now, whether that's bringing in somebody externally like myself to talk about menopause and raise awareness in that way, or whether it's just doing something internally, poster campaigns, support groups, surveys, there's lots of ways that you can get the conversation started. And I think there's definitely a place for policy, but I don't think it starts and ends with a policy. I think there's a lot of focus on you need a menopause policy. Well, actually, what does a policy do if you don't do anything with it? We can have policies for everything, but if nobody's aware of them, nobody reads them, and nobody knows that they exist, they're not going to change behaviours, they're not going to change attitudes. So I think that the whole kind of education piece, the awareness, the change in the culture is important, making it a culture where talking about women's health in general, not just menopause, but women's health is recognised, or women's reproductive health in particular, is recognised as something that sets us apart from our male colleagues. It's not detrimental. It doesn't mean we can't do our job. It just means that we may have other obstacles that we have to get over throughout our life in order to maintain the same level of productivity. But boy, when we do get it right, we fly and we're an asset. So I think the awareness piece is key. I'm not sure if I've gone a little bit off piste of your question, so my apologies if I have. But I think it starts with acknowledgement, then goes to awareness, and then you can put in the kind of the tangible things, if you like a policy, like having a page on your website that's dedicated to raising awareness and signposting people. Then you can maybe have, included in your employee assistance program, dedicated GP services that are trained in menopause, or occupational health that understand about menopause. So there's a practical side, but it's got to start with acknowledgement.
I agree. And I think at its heart, it's about awareness and inclusion and having really good quality, open conversations. Surely this can't be new to organisations, though. What makes talking about menopause so difficult in the workplace?
Oh, that's a huge question, isn't it? I think it's not an easy one to answer. I think if you look at the workplace demographic, life is changing dramatically. If you look back over the last 30 years, the number of women in that kind of typical menopausal age range has increased significantly. So women over 50 are now the fastest growing sector of the labour market. There's nearly 4.5 million of us in the workplace. That wasn't the case 30 years ago. I think I read a statistic, bear in mind I have got menopausal brain, so I don't always get my stats exactly right. I think there's been something like a 72% increase since the mid-90s in the number of women over 50 in the workplace. So in reality, it's not necessarily been an issue in the past, because there weren't that many women who were actually working through their menopause transition. So I think that's changed. I think the other reason we're talking about it more is because women are working through it now, and we have a voice, and we're starting to realise that we're good at what we do. And actually, this is costing people. This is costing businesses. This is costing us our own sort of mental health and well-being if we can't talk about this. We can't mask forever. So I think there are women, certainly, you look at the media, you look at the number of celebrities speaking out about menopause. But it's happening in lots of areas of life, not just menopause. There's a lot of subjects and topics that have historically been taboo that people are now talking more openly about. I think social media has probably had an impact on that as well, because more and more people are connecting and talking more openly in groups and in forums. So I think there's a bit of a sea change there. I also think changes in maternity rules 30 odd years ago have meant that women have been able to have a more stable career trajectory and have been able to reach those more senior levels. And they've worked bloody hard to get there, and they're not so willing to let something like menopause, knock them off that career ladder. I think I think we have got other things that we are dealing with, though. There's a societal narrative around older women that isn't kind to women. You know, if you don't look young and if you don't look attractive, you're kind of discounted. That's probably a bit of a generalization, but I think there is a definite narrative around the role and the value of women as they get older in the Western world that we're breaking down. We are breaking it down, but it still exists. So I think the flip side of that is that actually I think a lot of women don't want to talk about menopause as well. They don't want to talk about it if they have reached those higher levels in their career, because they fear that they're going to be judged or disadvantaged in some way. It's going to be career limiting. So I hope I answered your question. You see, I've got a menopausal brain, Sarah, so I go off at all different tangents.
Oh, don't worry, that happens to me regularly. It happened during a coaching session yesterday where I was in the middle of asking a question and then completely forgot what the question was. Yeah, and I just said, sorry, it's menopausal brain fog. I have no idea what I was going to ask you. Going back to that last point you made, though, about particularly women in leadership roles, that fear of talking up, of repercussions, of judgment. We've got a live example of that now, Nicola Sturgeon, who spoke, I can't remember who she spoke to, was at the BBC, and was saying, she thinks she's in at the start of a menopause journey, but has been very reluctant and still quite fearful of talking about that because of, judgment in the Scottish Parliament and how she'd be perceived. And I guess, the power balance for her, it's very important for her to look strong and act strong.
But why do we have this narrative that for some reason being a woman and having the changes in our hormonal fluctuations is somehow a weakness? I see it as a strength. Oh my God, we do all of that and some. It's not that we can't do things. We've got a lot that we're dealing with. And I think, when I look at my own experience, yes, I really struggled. I really, really struggled for a couple of years with menopause. I struggled partly because I didn't have the education. I didn't know what I was dealing with. Therefore, I didn't get the help that I needed. But once I got that help, once I got the medical help that I needed, because I'm a massive fan of hormone replacement therapy, there's a way for us to get through this without failing, without leaving the workplace. We can do that if we get the right help and the right treatment. And that help and treatment is potentially through a medical route, but also having the support in place within the workplace that you can talk about this. There's something about a problem shared as a problem halved. Once we feel comfortable talking about it, many of the problems dissipate, because a lot of the time the stress is in trying to mask. So if we can lift the mask, we lose a lot of the stress, and we know that stress exacerbates menopause symptoms. So it all makes sense. Talk more about it, make it more of an open conversation. You take away the embarrassment, you take away the stigma, we thrive. I'm 4 years into a business now, never ever expected to be a businesswoman, ever. But my menopause hasn't stopped me doing that. If anything, it's powered me forward. So it's not that we are incapable. With the right help and the right support, and it's not huge. The amount of support and help needed isn't huge, but we can thrive and we can continue to perform at our best. It's not, it doesn't make us weak.
No. And it's that old stereotype of woman has to act like a man in order to, to be that alpha woman, to compete in a male dominated environment. I don't agree with that. I think, we bring so many differentiated points, and embracing who we are and the natural feminine side and how we think differently, show up differently. Such a positive thing in the workplace, and really important for female leaders to act like that, to act as role models for other women coming up through the organisation, so they don't have to behave in a certain way. You can be who you are and still be successful.
Absolutely agree.
So I speak to a lot of line managers as part of my HR role who feel awkward about having conversations with women around menopause. What advice can you give line managers who feel that they have to know everything about HRT and menopause to have a conversation and therefore don't have one?
I hear this so much as well. I hear this so often. I think, first of all, you don't have to be an expert in anything to offer support to somebody. I'm sure line managers have other experiences of having to offer support to their members of staff. Maybe they're going through cancer treatment, or maybe they're going through infertility treatment, or maybe they're going through a bereavement. You don't have to have experienced any of those things to be able to empathise and offer support. I think the big problem here is the fear of causing offence. I think they worry that if they use the menopause word, it's going to be perceived by the person they're talking to as an insult. So there's a bit of there's a double-edged sword here. I think as women, we have to get over this shame that seems to surround menopause, and the shame of getting older. Now, this comes back to the whole sort of narrative around the value that we place on women as we're getting older. But, you know, if somebody says to you, how old are you? Oh, you never ask a woman her age. Why? Why would the number of years and days you've been on this planet be something to be ashamed about? So, and it's a privilege denied to so many. You know, my mum was 54 when she died. I'm sure she'd have loved to be able to say to somebody, I'm 58, but she never had the chance. So let's get away from this whole sort of shame around getting older and shame around the menopause, and make it easy for men and managers to talk to us. Because if we're not making it easy for them, they're not going to want to converse. But I think the flip side of that is you're a manager. You're paid to have difficult conversations. That's part of the job. So just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean you can't have it. So I have four C's that I talk about when I talk to managers, that I think if you employ these 4 C's, chances are you're not going to go far wrong. The first one is communicate. Actually have the conversation. Yes, it might feel difficult the first time, but it will be a heck of a lot easier the second. So just dive in and have it. Think about the words you're using. You know, you probably don't want to dive in and say, what's the matter with you? Are you menopausal? That's probably not going to work. But there's absolutely no reason why you can't start a conversation with, you don't seem yourself. Is there something going on? Is there anything I can help with? And then listening to what the person's talking about. And if there's a performance issue, actually saying, you know, I've noticed that this isn't, you know, you're not hitting the target in this area. What's going on? Is there anything we can help with? And is there anything we can help with? I would say is the key, because then you're opening space for that person to say, well, actually, you know, I'm not sleeping, I'm exhausted. And I seem as if I'm constantly forgetting things. And if the manager's had training, I think there's no reason why you can't say, look, I'm not suggesting that this is what it is, but all of the symptoms that you're talking about, or all of the things you're telling me, I've had training around perimenopause and they all sound like they tick off the perimenopause list. Have you considered that it could be this? Don't see any problem with that. And if a woman's offended by that, I think that's almost her problem, as long as the manager is coming at it from a place of my second C, which is compassion. You know, so have the conversation, communicate, do it with compassion. She's not a problem to fix. It's not like as a manager you have to fix her, but she, you know, if you ask, and I say her, not everybody that experiences menopause is a woman. That's a completely kind of, you know, there's a whole conversation to be had there, but in general, it will more than likely be a woman that they're having a conversation with. So do it with compassion. And the third C is curiosity. Ask, find out. I think the big thing that worries male managers in particular is they say, I don't know about this. I've never experienced it. I'm never going to experience it. What credibility do I have to talk about this? Well, there's lots of things in life I've not experienced, but I feel as if I'd be comfortable getting curious and asking. So what does that mean? You're not sleeping very well. What does that mean for you? What impact is that having on you day to day? What can we do to make life a bit easier? Would perhaps to having a later start time, or maybe working from home on the days when you've had a really bad night's sleep, would that help? Or what would help? So communicate with compassion, get curious, and the fourth one is confidentiality, because at the end of the day, this is still somebody's personal health issues you're talking about. So as long as you maintain confidentiality, don't try to feel like you have to know it all. Ask questions, ask open questions, explore what's going on. Don't dive straight into performance management issues. Try and explore what's underlying that, because if you've got somebody who's always performed well and suddenly they're not, there's a reason for that. So explore that. Don't just dive in thinking you've somehow got to fix a problem. Get curious and ask with compassion. So those 4 C's, I don't think you can go far wrong as a manager.
And they are that encapsulates a lovely quality coaching conversation, those 4 C's, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely, yes.
Can't go wrong with encouraging a coaching culture in an organisation.
That's very true.
So we're going to move on to a topic of Menopause Champions, and I know you're incredibly passionate about that, and you're doing work on that at the moment. Dr. Heather Curry, who's the former head of the British Menopause Society, advocates strongly for Menopause Champions. However, personalities such as Mariella Fostrop, who was one of the first celebrities to come out and share her menopause journey with us, and I loved the documentary that she did. She's called Menopause Champions window dressing, and said education and action is what's needed. I'm curious to know what your views are on this.
Well, it could be window dressing. It's like any other initiative. If you just do it as a tick box exercise to say, yes, we've ticked the Menopause Champions box, or we've ticked the mental health first aid box, or we've done the high level, aren't we good as an organization because we've ticked this box? Yeah, it's window dressing. But actually, if you have menopause champions embedded within the organization who are engaged, who have been trained and have the expertise to know their own limitations and where to signpost, they can be a massive asset in keeping the conversation alive, in feeding back to management what's going on at ground level, being that conduit between colleagues and their managers. If somebody doesn't feel confident to go and speak to a manager, they've got that first port of call, somebody who has knowledge and expertise and empathy to be able to have those conversations and guide them, and also to guide the manager. This, have you thought about this? This might help. Menopause champions are great because they take the pressure off HR. HR are, you'll know yourself, they're busy people. And a lot of times that, supporting menopause, we're going to do menopause. Can you sort it? And it's another job for HR to deal with. Whereas menopause champions can really support the HR function, but they're not HR. So they're independent. They've got that eyes and ears on the ground feel about them. They can advocate for women in the workplace. They can organize training. They can organize support groups. They can do surveys and focus groups that really inform and feed back to management about what's going on. Window dressing, well, they can be if they're not utilized and not trained properly, but get the right people who are fully engaged. They will advocate for women. They will. I'm kind of losing my words here because I feel so strongly that I know if I'd had somebody that I knew I could talk to confidentially, but who understood what I was going through while I was in the MOD, I'd have dived on that. And if we'd had the opportunity to be one, I'd have been them. I'd have been that person, that go-to person, that supports others. So I don't think they're window dressing. I think they're an integral part of keeping the conversation going, much in the same way as we have mental health first aiders, because we know that if this is something that we're dealing with and we want somebody who we can confidentially talk to, we go and speak to the mental health first aider. Well, let's go and speak to the menopause champion because she knows her stuff, or he knows his stuff. It doesn't have to be a woman. So I am, yes, 100% in favour. I think they absolutely add value. They're a cost-effective way to keep the conversation going because, let's face it, it's not cheap to bring in an external trainer or an external consultant to deliver that message. And also, people are more likely to open up to somebody who understands that environment better and can support them as they go through it and signpost.
And where I've seen that work effectively is also menopause cafes, where you create that psychological safety for women to come together as a collective. And there's something about the safety in numbers, the shared conversations, the shared experiences that forms a bond and increases people's awareness, confidence, and ability to talk. It's no abdication from leadership, though, to show up, to support, and to really be the voice behind this as well. I would never advocate for an organisation to have menopause champions and leaders stepping away and dump on them.
No,
which could happen. Which could happen depending on the culture and the point you made going back to that. So tell us about the work that you're doing around menopause champions.
So we've got a brand new program just launching. So there are lots of sort of training sessions for menopause champions, give them a little bit extra knowledge around what menopause is. But for me, the role of menopause champion isn't just about the knowledge. So we've created a 6-month menopause training and support program. It's an open program. So the idea is that we run cohorts of up to 12 menopause champions from different organizations. So you get that cross-pollination almost of ideas and best practice. And they have that peer support. Because actually what we want our menopause champions to do is be ideas people. You know, what ideas can we bring to keep the conversation going? But also that support program means that if a menopause champion has somebody come to them with a concern that they're not sure how to deal with, they've got that support network behind them that they can tap into to say, you know, this has happened. How would you deal with it? What do you think I should do? So we support them for 6 months on that program with a blend of e-learning. So all the theory and the knowledge around menopause is in an e-learning on demand format, and they have that for life, plus live workshops, virtual workshops, but sort of half-day workshop where we talk about, well, what actually is the role of a menopause champion and what are the boundaries? You know, what are my limitations? Where do I need to realize that this is where my expertise ends? Because let's face it, we're not medical practitioners, so we need to know where our limit of scope is.
Definitely.
And when and where to signpost to. So the live workshops are really about kind of defining the role for that individual in their own organisation, getting together, forming those sort of social networks that you mentioned that are so useful. And then we have continuing so consolidation coaching sessions over the 6 months to really help embed that role. And also, like you said, you know, if somebody does feel like, you know, I'm taking on this role, I just feel like everybody's dumping on me. Okay, let's talk about how you can maintain your boundaries within that role, because that's not what the role is about. It's not about taking on, you know, the abdicated responsibility from management. How do you push that back assertively without actually, you know, kind of having your own boundaries broken down? So it's the idea is that it is a full program of support and not just a half day kind of tick in the box training, which I think is really important.
So how can people find out more about that and more about the work that you do, Bev?
So they can, I mean, I'm probably most prolific on LinkedIn. So just find me on LinkedIn as Bev Thorogood. But my website is www.florescotraining.co.uk. Floresco is Latin for flourish, by the way. So that's where the name comes from. So florescotraining.co.uk, or just, DM me, find me on LinkedIn and drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, Bev Thorogood _menopause. So there aren't that many Bev Thorogoods, to be honest. So if you look us up, there aren't that many of us.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Bev. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I hope that program for Menopause Champions is successful. I'm sure it will be. And I'd love to invite you back after you've run a couple of those so you can share your learnings with my listeners.
I would love to. Thank you. Our first program goes live on the 20th of June. So I would love to come back, and it's been my absolute pleasure chatting to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bev. Have a lovely rest of the day.
You too.